Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever, on this network anyway, this month in 40K, this month for February 2023. I am joined by two stellar co-hosts, but I'll get to that in a second. Really, they're more guests because they're not regular to-hosts, but obviously we love to have them back. This show, the idea of it is to have an expert-level conversation about interesting and successful army lists that performed well during the past month. We want to talk about how they work, things to know about them, what they tell us about what was happening at that event, and what we can infer from them going forward. Really quickly, for those of you who are not here visually, let's say who's here. We have Doogs and Lennon. Doogs, if you would like to introduce yourself and maybe use a name that everyone will know when they're not looking at your lovely face.
I am Alex McDougall, longtime partner with Best in Faction and Art of War coach.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Lennon?
I'm John, a longtime lurker in the Best in Faction / tabletop Discord. Usually I just jump in whenever people need to get memed on. But I'm also an Art of War coach and one of our main content producers. You can find me on the Art of War YouTube channel and website.
Yes. And both of these people offer their coaching, and they are some of the brightest lights in the American 40K scene, which is why we have them here today.
Should we clarify North American scene or just pretend that Canada is the state it should be?
North American was the concept that I was going for there. Although that does bring up the idea, is there a South American 40K scene?
Oh, surely.
Okay.
It might not have, is.
Yeah, okay. It might not have come over yet, but I'm sure it exists.
Well, we look forward to hearing that. So let's just jump in with the first event, which is the most recent. I guess it counts as a super major, the FLG Cherokee Open. We want to talk about three different lists in that, one of which played by one of the people here on the screen. But let's just go in order of results. We will talk about Dark Angels by Stephen Crawley, and Space Wolves by Brad Chester, then Iron Hands by John Lennon. Starting with the Dark Angels that won the event. This is, to my mind, actually not the most blunt instrument that Dark Angels can be turned into, but close. It had Azrael, Ezekiel, a Chaplain, a Talon Master, 5 Infiltrators, 1 Ancient, 2 two-man command squads, 30 Deathwing, Thunderhammer, Stormfield Terminators, and a Ravenwing Apothecary. I assume you guys were aware of, especially John, of the existence of this list going into this event. Just broad strokes, what are your first thoughts about this list?
I'll spoiler alert, I ended up playing against this list. And spoiler alert, this list is in first place, so you can take a guess. My thoughts going into and out of the game were a little bit different, I ain't gonna lie to you. Going in, I thought that 20 Terminators was a good list, but that you needed the Ravenwing support to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And then going out of it, I was kind of mad that you didn't need the Ravenwing support to make it work, because that was just disappointing to me.
Yeah.
I really want the fast bits to be good. But basically this list, it really just functions as a slow, high-scoring stat check where killing 34 Thunderhammer Stormshield Terminators is a tall order when they're transhuman, and the forward one is probably -1 damage and there's an Apothecary hanging out.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, it is that is a brick right there.
It's interesting too because this has stat checked. No, I shouldn't say stat checked because that takes away from the person playing it. But it has done things to a number of top players. There's a couple of really good players on Team Canada that have had the same thing, where even some less nuanced lists where they went to 25, 30, 35 Terminators, and they went,
I've seen 40.
I can't kill this.
Yeah.
And it scores well. That's okay. I don't know what to do about this.
So very much not taking anything away from Steven, because I've talked to people who watched him play, and they absolutely say that his play added to what he brought. Is the math just that good? Is there nothing efficient that we can do about this, or is it just we were bringing tools to deal with guard, and then just this absolute anvil of Terminators showed up on our doorstep?
So my take is that this is the list is very well suited to the early arcs meta, because my take on the early arcs meta is that everyone is kind of reacting to the new slots, and the codexes that are currently on top, namely Space Marines and Guard, are standing out as some of the obvious early winners of the ARCs meta, because I don't think we're fully explored yet. I think that we're a little less explored than we would normally be at this point of time in the meta because of the post-LVO hangover that has affected quite a few people. But I really think that this list is awesome because the kind of damage that people are leaning into is, let me just take math-efficient damage rather than tricksy damage. And this is a math-efficient defense that works against math-efficient damage. The thing that this list hates is like random splash D3 mortal wounds when you charge, random squig bombs, random frazzles, like that kind of shit. Pardon my French. I didn't ask.
You're safe. You get at least one per episode.
That kind of damage adds up a lot against this kind of list. But then you run into like, the most mathematically efficient shooting list in the game is, wounding it on 4s and giving it a 2-up save. And it's like, all of a sudden there's a problem. So I think that this is kind of a really good counter to the initial meta of ARCs and the initial direction people are going. But there's a ton of counters to it. I spent a 7-hour drive on the way back thinking of like every single possible way you can tear this list in half. And none of it is the mathematically efficient way to do it. But it says something that 1 unit of Demonettes does more damage to this than an entire Iron Hands gun line. And that's with with perfectly average dice. 1 unit of Demonettes will kill more Terminators than my entire 2,000 points of Iron Hands pointing guns at it in Devastator Doctrine. And that's just a product of you have to bring the right tools for it. And this is really well set up to the tools that everyone assumes is best right now.
Okay. Everything you pay for in efficiency in your list just doesn't do anything to that list. Did you pay for good damage? Well, it's -1 damage. Did you pay for high strength or like a +2 wound? Well, that doesn't do anything either. Like it does really weird things to how you think you need to bring damage into the list.
Yeah, all of your mid AP is just like not actually there.
Garbage.
I put a solid like 45 AP2 saves on this thing, and I'm like, it's a lot of 2-ups he's taking there.
Followed up by 6-ups.
I mean, admittedly, well, obviously we're pretty early into ARCs, and there's still a lot of things that need to be figured out. But I would weirdly, I think I would target that one right away for something that might need to be changed. It's a weird this archetype list of like your entire army sitting on a 1+4+ transhuman -1. It's always was one of those things that was scary, but then they just overpointed it, and now I think they've shot the other direction where they've underpointed it. But
so you would say 2 to 3 points per Terminator, get them down to like 20.
Maybe make them pay for their gear back.
I'm playing Space Marines this season. Don't do that to me.
Fair enough.
But okay. So, but pay for their gear is like a 5 to 10 point per model tax. So
you don't have to pay for all of it.
Okay.
It's the fact that people are just like, oh yeah, pure Thunderhammers, like all the expensive stuff. What was the fact that it's all just free now is really weird when there's such a discrepancy in the value of the things you can buy.
That's for sure.
That's why we pointed them in the first place. We should not have the same amount of points for a Power Sword or a Thunderhammer.
Okay. My take on what you're saying, and I think hopefully you agree with me, is that they took a very broad brush when they took away Armor of Contempt. They're like, all right, and now points across the board, and some of that nuance is clearly missing. Unclear if when we would get point. It would sort of have to be an emergency. Yeah. So it's more start thinking about the actual tools that can go up against this. And your point of Demonettes is interesting because those are strength 4 AP 3 when they at some points, and just a lot of it.
They can get to strength. Their strength 4, they can easily get to AP 3, just like a little command phase hand, and they're damage 1. And it's like, that's the perfect profile to go into T4 transhuman 1-up armor 4 Benville.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, what's exactly the strength you need? Strength 4, anything more than that's redundant. What's exactly the AP you need? AP 3, ignore cover / combat, or AP 4, either one does the job. That's the exact perfect thing to put in there. And good luck finding strength 4, AP 4 shooting.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah, exactly. So the only other thing that I would want to talk about here is the speed of it. Is there any sort of play of just sort of wrap around the edges, pull it in different directions, or is that not going to be feasible against anyone who knows what they're doing?
It's very feasible if you're wrapping it with things that are either scoring points or doing significant damage.
Mhm.
But normally when, something flies along the flank, you go kill it because it's able to hit you.
Mhm.
And then it could do damage and you don't want to just get hit. But this list has a unique ability to put a 10-man Terminator unit on each objective marker and then wait there.
Sure.
And if all of its points are in those spots, then you have to find a new plan.
Right. That is in and of itself playing the mission.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so, okay.
The
Yeah,
ability
I
to
sent flanking units around. It didn't matter.
the ability to not interact with that unit or those units depends on, I think, mostly, are we playing a mission with a center objective, and do you just have the secondaries to ignore it? Like, if your secondaries are gaining points off of them, that's really tough.
Yeah.
Or one that pushes you to the center. Like, say you have Warp Ritual. Like, well,
Right.
you don't want to be anywhere near that center block of Terminators.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Completely true.
that army feels like a good starting point, and just a very clear, we found the most efficient data sheets for 0-point upgrades and jammed them. Let's talk about a different version of what I actually think is a similar thought process of how can we find the most efficient free stuff and jam it into a list, which is the second place list that Brad Chester brought. For those of you who aren't familiar, this was Space Wolves, Born and Whirlwind successor, so +1 on first round of combat, double exploding sixes, Chapter Master on bike, Chaplain on bike, 2 units of 5 infiltrators, 2 units of Van Vets with combinations of lightning thaws, thunder hammers, axes, and fists. All of them have melta-guns. 2 units of 5 Terminators. Again, chain fists, thunder hammers spread without melta-guns on those guys. 5 Wolfen. 2 units of 6 Skyclaws. 4 melta-guns in there, 2 big melee weapons. A unit of suppressors. And then 3 units of Long Fangs, all of which have a Terminator in it, so they're 6-mans. 2 of them are last cannons, 1 is grav. If you had pointed this in the pre-arc, this is probably like 2,700 to 2,900 points. And like some of the units, like the Van Vets, which are called Wolfguard and Space Wolves, and the Skyclaws are really offensive on that behalf, in my opinion. Similarly, just like broad strokes, what are your thoughts on this? Is my characterization of found free points jammed in list, close to the mark?
Yeah, it's absolutely, on target. I think it's just the direction is different, where one list did it for maximum defense, the other took it for maximum offense. Well, you can look at, I think, frankly, the top 4. The 4th place list here is Imperial Guard. And the top 4 of Cherokee were all take the new meta, pick a direction, go full speed into it, either damage or defense.
Okay.
And this list is, okay, how much damage can you crank into a Space Marine list? And I like you really can't get more free melta-guns and power weapons in an army than you see here. It's really hard to get more free crap than what you see here.
Yeah, and that's why it makes sense that the list is so MSU, that there's just a ton of units. You're just looking to, like, each unit maximizes what it's got in it, and then since the damage of each of those individual units has gone up so much, you can keep them small and just place them around the board and be getting maximum value out of each one.
And so obviously these 2 lists went up in the finals and Steven won. John, I assume you were there. What was your sense of how that actual matchup went? Because at least to my mind, looking at the Space Wolves list, if anything would have the offense to do it other than 90 demonettes per our earlier conversation, this has the amount of good weapons. So are you just losing too many efficiencies, or what happens when unstoppable force meets a movable object?
So I've got to admit a couple things here. One, I was not there for the game. Since I was not playing at that point, I actually elected to drive home and get home at 1 a.m. rather than get another night of a hotel.
Where's your dedication? Where's your dedication, sir?
But my impression of how the game would go and how the game went are very different. I was the driver, so I had different people kind of telling me how the game was going. And my understanding is that the Deathwing list did exactly what it's designed to do, which is when faced with a high damage opponent, which it cannot possibly get the drop on, because there's no universe where the Terminators get the drop on the Wolfguard, on the Space Wolves. Like, it's just one list moves 12 with charge bonuses, and one list moves 5 and sits there. And it just walked up in the phalanx of shields and took a hit, And when everyone was done hitting it, it just kind of, rotated its arm a little bit and hit it with a hammer. That's it. And my understanding here is that once again, Brad was able to send, or the opponent was able to send in a wave of damage. It wasn't enough. Sent in a second wave of damage. It still wasn't enough. And each time the Dark Angel player just killed what was in front of it and braced for the next hit. Okay. And kept doing that until the hand that was punching it broke. And I say once again because that is something that happened to me.
So spoiler for when we get to the next list down here.
Yep.
Alex, do you have any other thoughts there?
No, I don't think so. I will say that I don't know how much it comes up in Brad's game, but definitely will come up in John. I believe that Stephen won the defender role both times, which allowed him to place the big, nice piece of terrain on the center objective, and that definitely mitigates the damage quite a bit. So, I mean, that's just playing the game correctly. Steven knows he wants to get onto the middle objective and control the board from there. But it does change drastically. Like if John had been playing him and had said, here's a tiny little crate in the middle, you have to hold that center objective because that's how your army works. I'm sure the game is a little bit different. But that's the understanding that we all know going into any FLG event. So,
yeah. I'll talk a little bit more about the Space Wolves because I think I talked a little bit too much about the Dark Angels in my Space Wolf analysis, and I want the Space Wolf players to feel represented because they're genuinely awesome right now. I really, really like the concept that Brad was on here. I think, and my personal theory here is that Space Wolf successors are better as Artisan's Whirlwind, so that you get that reroll in shooting for all of the meltas that are just splashed in here. Because I think you want to get a little more efficiency out of all the free guns you have. Because my veterans can go in there in most chapters with like a shield and a combat weapon, and here they're going in with a melta gun and a combat weapon, which means they hit harder on the way in, but objectively they will be there for less time. Yeah. And so I really like how MSU you can make Space Wolves. I love the amount of stuff you can fit in this list. I think that Brad's onto something really good here, and I would love to see his next evolution of it. But I really think that just the amount of stuff you can fit in a Space Wolf list is intimidating. I think, though, that honestly, the best way forward for Space Wolves is to cut the things that are trying to be slightly durable and replace them with even more disposable and hard-hitting. Because the two 5-man Terminators with Meltas and Giant Fists, I look at that and I think, this could be even more jump hack with Melta in combat and then another unit.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's admittedly that's where my spammy brain goes.
So at a infinitely lower, so as to be ludicrous to compare them level, have been messing around with Space Wolves as well. And I started with 20 Terminators and now I'm at 0 because, to your point, they're actually just not as durable as you want them to be. And so why spend 2x the points when I can have 2x the models? I will throw out my crazy. So your comment about Artisans and Whirlwind makes me just want to put out there, I think Whirlwind is correct. I think that other one is the flex point. Here's my crazy thing that I'm trying, and feel free to laugh at me or just ignore me. But you can throw Bobby G in there for his +1, and you can do the Hungry for Battles who are +2 across the board. And he gives rerolls to Wolfen who don't normally get them. I'm just saying.
You're about to throw me on a huge tangent because I actually run my Ultramarine successors as those traits because that's what Emperor Spears get. And then you have access to a 1 CP +1 wound and 2 CP, an entire army rerolls hits in combat. But that's Ultramarines, not Space Wolves, so I'll let the Wolves have their glory for now. But yes, I love the +2 advance, +2 charge that when you stack with Bobby.
All right, you heard it here first, folks. John Lennon saying Bobby G Space Wolves. Moving on to what John Lennon actually said at Cherokee was John's Iron Hand list, rounding out sort of the ways you can do Space Marines broadly successfully. Artisans and Whirlwind, as we just discussed, a Lieutenant to Tech Marine, 2 units of 5 Infiltrators, the Volcon that absolutely destroys everything it shoots at, Scouts loaded for Bear because they get a bunch of free stuff, 10 Lightning Claw, Storm Shield Van Vets. You put a Relic Blade on a Sergeant and an extra Chainsword in there, I assume, for points. 2 Tornadoes, a Thunderstrike, 5 and 5 Devastators with Grav, and 1 multi-Melta, because that's the efficient way to run that. 3 Reapers, 1 Pod, 1 Storm. John, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so this was definitely me trying to take a an Iron Hands list that was mostly shooty with a little bit of combat. I went with Whirlwind Artisans, which is my favorite combo of Space Marine chapters for successor traits. I was kind of in between Ultramarines and Iron Hands going into the event, but I hadn't written an Ultramarines list that I had exactly where I wanted it. And Iron Hands is very easy to slot the pieces together. And this was also me kind of switching armies like right as lists were due, because I realized my guard army was not painted enough for me to feasibly take.
Fair.
Like I was planning on guard, and then my Castrican were delayed in the mail, and I realized I'd missed the list submission or the conversion submission deadline. So I didn't submit any conversions because my Castrican were in the mail, and then the Castrican didn't get there, and I was like, and now I haven't submitted conversions. Cool. So I went with Space Marines, and it was a really, really solid list. I went for as much like efficient shooting as possible, and I tried to be overwhelming with it because I knew I was playing on frontline terrain where you can kind of create your own firing lanes. But I wanted to have a bunch of Vanguard veterans in, and not only was this a little bit of a last minute pivot for me faction wise, but after I wrote the list, I found out that I had to change it because they ruled that character Contemptor took up an elite slot, not a character elite slot.
Oh, interesting.
Even though he's a character. And so I had to actually cut a unit of Vanguard veterans from the list and replace it with a third Gladiator Reaper because that's what I had painted. But I was like, well, you know what? Adding more efficient guns surely can't hurt, right? Sure enough, it hurt, but not me. So no, it ended up as a very efficient list that was designed to kind of crank the lever of, okay, if you're in line of sight, you die, and you're not engaging me effectively back. So back up and hide behind your walls. Now just kind of tighten the screws every turn, just edge the angles a little bit closer, and then like kind of missile in, random stuff to contest objectives and make sure the scoreboard is favoring me. Eventually people step out and then they get shot. That's it.
It's a lot of T8 too.
It is a lot of T8. It was awkwardly difficult to engage for a lot of people. Like a Gladiator isn't individually durable, but not a lot of people have a lot of good answers to T8. And when they do, I usually shoot those first.
Yeah. And the Reaper over the Lancer, the thinking there is just more dice with Iron Hands is better.
Oh yeah, we at home we've been testing the Reaper versus Lancer, and I am happy to report that it is firmly the Reaper that is better. 25 points more just gets you a lot of different things, and by that I mean it's a lot of dice. Whereas the Lancer can kill exactly like 2 models a turn, but it can kill big models. The Reaper can kill an infinite number of models per turn, basically, and is still shockingly good at anti-tank because, hey, take, like 8 AP2 saves is actually a decent way to get through a Rhino rather than take 1 or 2 AP4 saves.
Would that also be true in non-Iron Hands?
In general, yes. I think that Iron Hands benefit the most the Gladiator Reaper, but I could easily justify a Reaper in any army that is interested in Devastator Doctrine or Tech Marines.
Okay. And then just, I know we sort of alluded to it, but, punched Dark Angels in the face and the hand broke, not the face. Was that sort of what happened with you?
Yeah, I kind of had a plan going in where and this was an erroneous assumption on my part. I guess I hadn't quite paid as much attention as I needed to. I thought that the best Dark Angel lists were going to be 10 or 20 Terminators, and then a lot of Raven Wing support.
Right.
And so I kind of had done the math for that kind of list, and I decided that I would be able to kill Raven Wing support very, very quickly, which was true. Any number of bikes or lane speeders on the table were going to die. Right. Just everything in line of sight was going to die. But then the Terminators, I would kind of just hammer them with dice and outmaneuver them for a little bit, and then drop a Vanguard Veteran hammer on them, because if you are willing to invest 4 CP in the adventure, you get to a point where a unit of 10 Vanguard Veterans averages 42 invulnerable saves caused to a Deathwing Terminator squad, which if they fail half of them is 21 failed saves, chuck an Apothecary, and they lose 5 and change. Pretty much close to 6. If you hammer of Wrath for a 5th CP, it gets to 6. Right. And I figured that, and then all of the shooting would be enough to kill 20 Terminators or so. And I was right. I just wasn't counting on there being more Terminators when I was done. I think at the end of that game, I was able to crack he had 34 Terminators to start. I think he had 4 Terminators alive at the end of the game, and 5 came back over the course of the game.
Okay.
So I was able to crack basically every Terminator on the table, but it did take me the entire game to do so, and he ran up a decent primary while that happened. In this game, I ended up activating every single heavy weapon in my army every single turn without losing one of them. And somehow, I think like my casualties for this game were the Vanguard veterans who went in on a one-way trip, killed less Terminators than I had hoped, and then died. I lost the 2 infiltrator squads, and I think I lost 2 land speeders and the scouts. Right. But every heavy weapon on the table fired every turn. And the gladiators and the devastators, I never lost a devastator. I never lost a tank. I never lost the Thunderstrike and the Dreadnought. And just all of those units shot 5 times. And at the end of it, he had more points than me because he just still had models in the face of that much firepower, which is frankly impressive.
Impressive and oppressive. So is there anything that you can think of, and let's just open it up to both the Space Wolves and the Iron Hands, and this to both of you. If we're saying those are offense lists and Dark Angels are defense, is there anything offense that could be done there? Or do they just have to start playing Demonettes?
1,000. It's all Demonettes all the time. It's Demonettes and Fiends.
Do you mean within the Iron Hands and Space Wolves, or in general?
Within the Iron Hands and Space Wolves. And, depending on how long everyone wants to chat about this, we're going to run through most of the other armies that are doing well. So we can certainly go back to that. But specifically on those two, since that's what we've talked about.
1,000%, yeah. I think the problem actually was in my scoring, not my damage output. I think that the 3rd Gladiator Reaper, the kind of the last minute ad I put in, was very redundant because it's not useful into Deathwing Terminators. Right. And everything that died to 3 Gladiator Reapers was frankly going to die to 2. The Reapers were amazing. I really, really enjoyed them. But 2 definitely felt like it was the right number. And I think I really needed to replace that with either more mission play, which would be like another Scout in Storm package just to get more points, or a 5-man Vanguard veteran to have a smaller missile descend after things like characters and infiltrators. Because I burned my 10-man. I kept it whole. I didn't combat squad it. I burned it on a play to try and kill a 7-man Terminator squad because I knew the math was about 21 failed saves. At the end of that, I underperformed significantly, but then I lost the melee resource and I was down to, okay, I guess I'll just shoot him for the rest of the game with no other real options for getting units behind walls. So I think just either adding in more mission play or another 5-man Vanguard veteran, would actually make the Iron Hands capable of winning the game. I was capable of winning it as is. I just I think I ended up falling about 2 points short. But I think just adding a little more variety is going to be the answer here. Just instead of leaning even further into the damage rabbit hole that gets sucked into the black hole of Dark Angel Terminators, diversify a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was detailed and interesting, and thank you so much for sharing. Let's move off Space Marines but stay within the Imperium. Move to a different event. Team Battle Brothers 40K Major in Carthage, North Carolina. Michael Agner, Aigner, Michael, however you pronounce your name, played Guard. I picked this one because it felt largely representative of what we're seeing with Guard, which is Lord Solar, a command squad, a tank commander, one other pick your HQ, in this case, a Death Corps Marshal, 40 Cadians, 30 Kazarkins, 3 Plasma Sentinels, 3 units of mortars, 3 Leman Russes, a Chimera. You'll sometimes see some Dorns, you'll sometimes see some Bulgrins, but you're broadly going to see these data sheets. John just spoke a lot, and I'm seeing Alex nod. So, Alex, what do you think of when you think of this list?
I think this is going to be the core of most Guard lists. I don't see. It's one of those ones where the book is very strong, obviously, and it'll be sort of like when Tyranids came out, when there was like kind of a known quantity of about 1,400 points, and then the last 600 points will flex. So you'll see stuff like maybe a Dorn gets fit in, Ursula will probably be in the list, more mortars, less Kazarkin. Like I could see like 6 or 9 mortars in some lists, a couple more Sentinels, 1 less tank. Like that's the kind of changes that you're going to see, but mostly it's going to be something like this. Like I've played against Guard a number of times now on TTS, and they all have this blueprint to them.
I haven't even played against the New Guard Codex yet.
Have you not?
No, I've played with it a ton, but like...
Okay.
Yeah, I just kind of dodged it at the one tournament I went to. I thought I was ready for it, but I never had to test that theory.
Yeah. Speaking of things that can kill that Dark Angels list.
This one can do it?
Yeah.
Is it just the Kazarkins, or is it just the sum total of everything?
It turns out that when you don't have to roll to wound,
Good call.
it's pretty good. Oh, you have transhuman? I don't care.
Yeah. I think that the Dorn variant will become more popular in the face of this, frankly.
Yeah, flat 4 is a big deal.
Flat 4 is a big deal because a lot of guard packs flat 3, and then -1 damage means that you have to fail 2 saves to lose a Terminator every time, regardless of if the Apothecary is nearby. Now, when you get the Dorn to flat 4, that provides a very scary blast weapon into the Dark Angels, and that's actually huge for multiple reasons. If the Dark Angel player doesn't know the matchup, they keep their 10-mans as a 10-man, and you order every single tank in the army to double units for the purpose of blast.
Max blast, baby.
And that means that until you kill them down to a 5-man, every single blast weapon is just heavy 9 instead of D6 plus 3, and that will add up on invulns. I promise it'll add up. And if the Dark Angel player does know what they're doing, then they flip every squad to combat squads, and now only one 5-man gets -1 damage instead of a 10-man. And now all these damage 3 weapons, which actually have to roll the number of shots, the horror, they start just shooting at all of the 5-mans that don't have -1 damage, and now every failed save hurts. And so you run into a problem where the Dark Angel list doesn't really want to be in the open anymore, which is part of the strength. And once you hit that checkpoint, it becomes purely who's outscoring who. They both have good passive secondaries, and then it becomes a fairly close game in my mind and very dependent on the terrain set, who got the first drop of terrain if you're playing frontline gaming terrain, etc. Then it becomes much more interesting. Once the Dark Angel player knows what the guard player is going to do if they keep as 10-mans, because I just cannot imagine that someone would make that kind of mistake twice, but I can very easily see it happening once.
That makes sense. So just listening to all of this, is there a bit of rock, paper, scissors? Because how does this guard army deal? Like, I'm thinking specifically with Brad's that's MSU and wants to get up and punch you. Are they going to be able to do that? Is it totally terrain dependent? Do they not care? What does that sort of a situation look like?
It's very terrain dependent in my mind. I don't mean to speak for Alex, but I got to watch Brad's round 8, which was against guard because it was on the table next to me. And every time the Dark Angel player was rolling, 40 batches of 2-up saves and not failing any, I just kind of like stared over at like a Rogel Dorn being wrapped in sky claws. And I was like, looks like they're having fun over there.
Right.
So jokes aside, that kind of like MSU high damage thing is like a nightmare for guard. But if they can hold it at arm's length, guard have good passive scoring. And Space Wolves score very well while interacting with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so terrain and the guard's ability to be disciplined, not get too close, zone out areas of the board, I think is super important. And that's what I'd be looking to see from the guard player. I think it's winnable for guard, but that matchup is a very challenging one because it kind of forces you to go against the play style you want to use when you're Imperial Guard, which is crush people beneath the tracks of the Emperor.
Not that you have any personal takes on which are the good guys and bad guys in that matchup.
I like Space Marines and Guard. I'm a loyal servant of the Imperium.
Okay.
Top 4 of all Imperium surely can't be bad.
So is it a fair characterization to say there are serious questions that many armies are asking, but that there seem to be answers to those questions that are available? We've yet to find the unanswerable question.
Alex, you want to take this one? I don't want to talk over you.
I would say that right now all the top lists in the game do have answers for sure. I would say the one that probably has the least answers once it starts to get really refined is Guard.
Okay.
I personally think Guard is the best army in the game. It's got a very deep codex. It's got lots of different options and things that can be done to flex into what comes to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And even stuff that might seem weird, like, are you a list that only moves 5 inches and you want to be sitting on a center objective? I think I have enough damage elsewhere. I'm going to throw a Death Strike in. You want to move those Terminators to the center of the board? Get ready for 16 Mortals turn. It can put down a large enough template that you actually can't get out of the way with Terminators unless you run. Like, do you really want to be running your Terminators and not shooting your Stormbolters at the 70 guard that are on the board?
I would love to see a Death Strike on a table next to me. So I do think that that's an interesting point. And John, you mentioned that the reason you went Iron Hands was your Kazarkins hadn't shown up. do we think that some of this is still just model availability for players? Like you would have played guard at Cherokee, John? Yes.
Yeah. If my guard army was fully painted, I would have taken it to Cherokee. My Space Marines already were fully painted. I'll admit I'm being a bit of a snob about it. I'm trying to turn my guard army into a real hobby project, not just a 3-color standard. So the guard army was actually fully painted by conventional standards. I simply chose not to bring it because it wasn't up to the standard I wanted to bring. Because the guard army will be my pitch for best overall, and I do not want to bring it until I'm ready to make that pitch. Because I don't want people to judge my paint at an event and be like, "Hey, remember 2 months ago when John's Guardsmen only had 4 colors on them?" Like, I don't want that. So I'm saving it until it's ready. I do think model availability is a real thing. You know, Kazakhin are hard to get. I don't know how generous events are being with their conversion approval. I don't know if they're just saying whatever stormtroopers are fine, which honestly they're the same darn model.
I was going to ask. They're guardsmen with a gun. Why can't we just use different guardsmen with a different gun?
Exactly. You probably could.
Okay.
But I think model availability is a big thing, and especially for Space Marines, model availability is a big thing because no one has bought a Gladiator ever. I consider myself a rare example. I bought 2 of them when they came out with some store credit, at an event, and the shrink wrap had dust on it when Arcs of Omen came out. So I delved deep into the garage to find those bad boys, but I got them and I built them. But I do think mod availability is going to be a big thing. And to your earlier question, I think that every single top army has an answer to it that exists in the metagame. I think not every army can bring that answer.
That's fair. So there might end up being some rock, paper, scissors. Which matchup did you get near the end of an event?
Yeah, I don't think there's a trump card right now. My take actually is that Iron Hands is the best army in the game if it's fully refined. I think that I was just 90% there. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'll play Iron Hands because I'm trying to get this guard army painted. I'm actually building the Kazakhin kit that arrived while I was at Cherokee. I'm actually building it right now.
Lovely. So just to put a bow on this, because one of the topics in 40K discourse right now is guard not winning events. We think that's going to change pretty soon.
Yeah, I think that they'll ramp up a little bit. But genuinely, I don't think that guard is standalone oppressive. Guard is just one of the good armies in the game right now, one of the ones that has potential to win a super major. But guard also have plenty of flaws. And I think there's a lot of room for a guard player to make one mistake and lose a game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alex, do you want us to talk about Tyranids now, or do you want to talk about Tyranids in 5 minutes when the food is moved to?
No, we good. I don't know if you saw the little look of panic on my face. I put the chicken in my mouth and went, "Oh, that's too hot."
All right. Well, let's jump down to the HWP Salty Classic GT from February in Plantation, Florida. And the 2 players we're going to talk about here are at least known quantities to other folks on this chat. First one, Mark Parker with Tyranids. He brought Leviathan, 2 Tyrants, 10 of each of Gargoyles, Hormagaunts, Termagants, 5 Tyrant Guard, 3 Zones, 4 Carnifexes, and 2 Harpies. The 2 of you are right near the top of the possible brain trust of what bugs do in this world. Tell me about this list. Is this what you would do? Is Mark crazy? Is he a genius? Is he some of both? What are your thoughts?
I think he's brave.
Okay.
I mean, the core is still there. The 2 Tyrants and the Tyrant Guard makes sense. That's going to be a decent core of any army. Carnifexes are still solid. I think they're overpointed now, but that is what it is. Like the list for what it does makes sense. We've gone full durability with full transhuman on basically everything. We've gone with the 4+ invulnerable save the 1 turn because of zones, maybe more if you want to hand it out. But I just look at the list and go like, dang, this is everything that got nerfed. Like the Harpies don't even get to start on the board anymore.
Harpies got buffed, good sir.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it, John.
Please do. Let's talk about this. I'm very curious because if the 2 of you are even in jest disagreeing, there's enough of an argument on both sides. I want to hear it.
So I think that Harpies got better because the only reason I didn't take Harpies before was because I, as a Tyranid player, like hiding. and Tyrant Guard and Tyrants help me do that. And I hate it when I go second and I try to hide my army and my opponent shoots me anyways. And if you have Harpies and you can't afford the CP to put them in a reserve because it's Nephilim, and you go second against Knights, someone with Helverins, Tau, Votan, you just kind of politely lift 340 points of off of the table, and you just save some time on your opponent's chess clock instead of making them roll dice to just murder these poor Harpies. Because you don't want to pop Zoanthrope Doctrine for just the 2 Harpies, but then you might have to. And then if they're just sitting there, the only things in line of sight, then they just die sometimes. And they're tough. Sometimes they live. But I really like that the Harpy can choose when it's going to get shot, and that means it can always get the first shot off. I also personally think that the Harpy got cheaper, not more expensive, because Armor of Contempt going away makes me actually want to bring Barbed Stranglers over Heavy Venom Cannons. And the Barbed Stranglers are wonderful because they are cheaper than the old Heavy Venom Cannon was, and it's good volume of Strength 8 AP2 damage too, which is phenomenal for killing every Marine that is not wearing a priceless relic of the Horus Heresy and carrying Storm Shield for free. Mm-hmm. And him and his 49 friends.
Yeah.
So what it sounds like to me is John is saying that these are buffed because they force you to no longer make poor decisions.
Yeah. I completely agree. But I agree that's what he's saying. Do you agree with that point?
Okay, so both me and John were already on the Harpies shouldn't be in your list train.
Okay.
Before Arcs of Omen. Mm-hmm. And now they've gone to a point where they have to be off the board on turn 1. I mean, the biggest one for me for the nerf is that you're not allowed to drop Spore Mines anymore because you have to pay for those.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, sure. They're going to come down turn 2. I just think there's enough pressure lists in the game where if you go second, you might just not even get to use your Harpies until your army is getting cracked. Like if you step out at all on turn 1, you're not that tough. Are you popping out the army on turn 1 and popping 4++ off the Zoanthropes on that turn to be able to take the crack back if you've gone second, and then the Harpies show up without defense? It's definitely a weird one. So generally, I'm glad he did well. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, he got lucky or something. I have no idea what his pairings were, but I can definitely see a lot of armies that's kind of going I just don't care about this list at all.
So what are you doing with bugs? Are you staying mids?
I've gone total opposite direction from this.
GSC straight or forces? Or
for competitive, yes, I will be playing pure GSC. But if I was told you must take Tyranids to a GT, I still wouldn't be playing anything like this. I'm going Gorgon, Hormagaunts, Horde, still fast moving. I've dropped the Zoanthropes. I've gone to a Turvagon, definitely a different style of play for sure.
Okay.
It's much more secondary heavy and much less I'll just kill you with big bugs. Okay. I'll go tie you up on your side of the board with Hormagaunts that can drop a knight, which is hilarious. Yeah, it's a very different path. So I'm surprised by its success, but it's still cool to see that it's happening.
Fair enough. John, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know the lure of the bugs is strong for you as well.
Yeah, I really love Tyranids. I have, similar to Alex, been playing more Gaunt heavy. I've played I think I've played 3 games of Arcs with Tyranids, and each time I kind of cry into a mirror first. But to be fair, I've also gone out and they've still performed for me, so I can't just knock them. I really love and absolutely love double Walker with Venom Cannons. I think it's just fantastic. I think it's one of the best things we can take right now. Just having that a bit of unshootable shooting to give people pause. Obviously paired with Tyrant card. I like the Turvagon for a lot of primary play because I do worry that this list is leaning more into the stats element of bugs just with less than before. And that means that, Tyranids, which was an army that did this before and occasionally failed the stat check, now they have less and other people have more, which in my mind just means that you're more likely to fail the stat check than before. And kudos to Mark. He's been rocking out a very similar version of this for a while and doing very well with it. And I know a lot of the people down in Miami. It's not an easy crowd down there. So certainly it's a well-earned victory. But I do worry that he will eventually find the stat check that he won't pass. And it's just more likely to find it now than he was in Nephilim. Okay. And I don't think that there's much of a backup plan for monster nids. If their plan of be a monster at you does not work, then that's it.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving on to the other list from this event that I want to talk about that Stat checks you certainly in one way. Tim Pinney brought World Eaters. And I want to talk about this because World Eaters basically seem to have been, allowed starting this last week, and they showed up and did well. And this was seemingly one of the more representative lists. So it had Lord Invocatus, a Lord on Juggernaut, 10 Jackals, 4 units of 5 Berserkers, 5/5 and 3 8-bound, 3/3 and 3 Exalted 8-bound, 3 Solo Spawn, and 2 Rhinos. This wants to punch you in the face really hard. I would love to hear your thoughts on the angriest former gladiators in the Grimdark. Alex has a full mouth, but he's about to start.
No, we're good. We're good. I am playing, potentially, we'll see how late this goes. I am potentially playing this list almost exactly tonight.
Okay.
On TTS. I think he's dropped the Cultists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Jackals.
And that's it. And everything else is like to the points the same.
So sorry, you're playing against him or you're playing
Against.
with it? Okay.
Against. Yeah, very, very similar. Yeah, this list is scary. It is extremely aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Its strongest thing is that its pregame move stuff ignores the rules that everyone else has,
Right.
which is probably a necessity. I'll be honest, if that was supposed to be a type. Oh, I should describe it first. So they have a pregame move that does not have the little rider in there that says you have to be 9 inches away from your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an army that is not able to be walled out with like infiltrators.
Yeah.
You can't just put your little string of infiltrators up front and go, you can't get to me. Like, no, they'll come right to that unit. Then in the movement phase, go again past that unit and come and charge you on turn 1.
Right.
I hope they don't change that. If they do change that, I think the army's just dead.
Agreed.
Like if that was like GW says in a month from now, they're like, oh, sorry, actually that was supposed, add the in the errata, add this to the end, cannot be within 9 inches of an opponent. I think the army's just like completely screwed. But yeah, it's a great list, and if you like combat, it's a fun list. It is like the most Khorne army. Go and smash your opponent in the face and do it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that they made the secondaries of this army really reward you for doing exactly what Khorne wants you to do, which is murder everyone on the objective and then die because Khorne does not care where the skulls come from. So, I think 2 of the 3 faction-specific secondaries they have are just get points for something dying. I don't care whose it is. And then the third one is you kill. So just all violence all the time. No actions required. It's pretty cool. It's not an army for me, but it is genuinely a pretty darn cool army. And I think a lot of World Eater players have been getting excited for it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it feels like it's a little bit mono build, that's probably a product of how many data sheets they have available, which is 3.
Yeah, I was gonna say as much as this, like I just described, I'll be playing against this very similar. I don't think there's a whole lot of variance from this. I don't think some genius is gonna figure something out where they're like, oh, this is how you actually build World Eaters.
Mm-hmm. Just wait for that Angron plus Terminators meta that none of us saw coming.
Well, that was going to be my one question on that. Is there a world where you can do Angron, or just the Lord Invocatus is too necessary? Angron's a pretty model, but he's in the mid-tables with the fluffy, well-painted armies.
From virtually anyone I've talked to that I have faith in as a player, they've told me that Angron is the not as good build.
Okay.
Yeah, that is my impression from reading it and talking to people as well. But to give a glimmer of hope for those of you who like the Big Angry Ron, I don't remember exactly how they ended up, but there was a point where I was 4-0 at Cherokee eating on my lunch break, scanning through BCP, and there were at least 2 4-0 lists that included Angron. Because I think there was one point in the tournament where I got to make the joke, there are more undefeated Angrons than Lord Solars. And
Okay.
Yeah, I waited till Alex took a bite for that one.
You wanted the spit take on
It was true. And it didn't end that way. Lord Solar held on longer than the 2 Angron lists. I think they both dropped around 5. But still, they made it pretty far. And that shows that Angron has some juice, even if Invocatus has a very strong argument in favor of him. And I think Invocatus is the answer. But you don't always have to take the best answer when you're list building. Sometimes you can intentionally take a more fun answer as long as there's some value to it. no one wants to take something that is just blatantly worse, but
Right.
hey, going in a different direction, still somewhat viable, still fun, is perfectly good choice to make for a lot of people.
And Angron asks weird questions that kind of no other model in the game does.
Yeah, like,
it's
can
almost
you kill a rhino twice? And I'm like, yeah, sure can.
yeah, it's like it's almost like asking the same question as the Incarn, where it's like, where are you going to have to deal with this model? Not like when. Like, you're going to deal with this model. There's no getting around it. At some point,
Right.
something's going to die, even maybe unexpectedly. And you suddenly have this model in a spot you never thought it would be. Like, that's kind of the same thing with Angron. You're like, I got him. And you're like, but did you? And where is he coming in now? And are you ready for that?
Okay. And how would you say these world leaders go into the other top end of the meta? Is it a go first die roll situation? Is it a terrain situation? Are there some of the armies that it will match up with, it won't? What are some thoughts there?
You want to go, John?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the World Eaters army is super die roll dependent. It's not explicitly do I win or lose based on who's going first. I think it's a lot of World Eaters have exactly 2 play styles, and which one they take is going to depend on the first die roll. Where if they go first, they take advantage of the scout move, they sprint straight at you, and they are trying to table you or do enough damage that they win the game by the time you can table them. And they pin you in, kind of like orcs. Like when orcs deploy in the line, run at you, and you finish killing them, and you wipe your brow, and then you look at the scoreboard and realize they have 79 points on Get the Good Bits, and you're like, oh shit. I think World Leaders do that if they go first, and if they go second, they're just bleeding units onto objectives, somehow getting 15s on 2 different objectives, like 2 different secondaries, just because you're shooting them, and then they get a 12 at the end because they never really got to get your whole army in combat the way they wanted to, but they did enough. And they don't give up any particularly, high secondaries themselves. And then they scored every point possible. And they're like, oh, wow, they just kind of get an 85 for dying to my guns. And if you don't get an 85 while killing them because you're trying to stay out of charge range, then that could be it.
Interesting. So not just a flash in the pan army that people weren't prepared for, but like actual tools to hang around with the other good armies out there.
I think they have tools to be exploited by good players. I don't think it's going to be particularly easy to play World Leaders at a top level because you run into a problem where the army is armed with bolt pistols and dreams. And if you can't beat a competent player with melee units and transports, you're going to be in trouble.
Okay, that's fair.
Or someone with an aircraft.
Okay.
Just an aircraft. Just flying around, laughing at where the Raptors went. Oh, what's that? They're still in the old Space Marine Codex. It's like, that's it. There's no flight keyword here.
That is a good point. Yes. And yeah, certainly the more transport heavy close combat army is going to give them problems because they only do damage in one phase.
So I think World Leaders will still get some success. Like, I think it's going to be an army that gets a very modest win rate after the first initial rush of, oh my God, what do they do? But then even when we see World Leaders floating in the 48 to 52% win rate every week, I think we're still going to get a World Leader in the podium of an event almost every weekend.
Okay. And that's a very nice place to have your army end up. So I think we talked a lot about the characteristics of this next army that I want to discuss. And so let's get into it. The Scorched Earth Open in Gilbert, Arizona. Justin Aguilar went 5-1 with Orcs. And Orcs sure do seem to be showing up a lot, and a lot more than I would have guessed leading into Arc. And this is a broadly representative build that Justin brought. It's Goffs. It has Zagstruck, a War Boss in Mega Armor, War Boss on Bike, 2 units, 10 Boys, 3 units, 10 Gretchen, 2 units, 10 Commandos, 3 units of 7 Knobs, 3 units of 10 Storm Boys, and 3 Battle Wagons. So just like John said, an army that wants to rush at you, you kill them, and oh my God, it has points. But also this one has transports for its melee stuff. So, curious what your thoughts on this list, how it fits into the meta, how it fits into the conversation we're already having.
I think Orcs are incredibly good. Like, I think Orcs are insanely underrated in my mind. I'd actually say that Orcs were my most difficult game of the weekend.
Interesting.
Cherokee. Now, obviously, my one loss was to Dark Angels. I don't want to, devalue that game at all because it's a great game and very difficult and hard fought. but also it was the Dark Angel game was one where I knew what my answer was, and I applied it as frequently as possible, and at the end it wasn't correct. I just didn't quite get there. But I had a very entertaining and difficult game round 5 into Marcus and his orcs, and it was a wonderful game, one that I really enjoyed because Marcus was a phenomenal opponent. But orcs are insanely good. They score so well. Removing Arm of Contempt means they kill almost everything in the game. Anyone who cares about AP1 is going to find out that they're taking way too much AP1. So unless you're an army that doesn't care about AP1, and we've already talked about Dark Angels, unless you're that, it's a real problem.
Yeah, armies like this that are that level of fast and that level of pressure, they can just do things to certain players that, like, you have so little time to respond. Like, if somebody says, like, hey, what do you do if you have a bunch of orcs on your doorstep? Like, well, you might have an answer, but what if that answer comes in multiple phases and you don't get one of them, depending on how they position their units? Or the stages of that plan don't work because you didn't crack the battle wagon? Like, they do have a lot of wounds. And if it's on a WOG turn, they're tougher than you think. And then if you miss that one phase of damage and the plan falls apart, like, that's it. You don't have a second turn to like make a new plan. It's just kind of over. It's almost like one turn delayed, but like a more technical World Leaders list. Like, you are getting smashed in combat and it's happening fast, but it might be one turn behind what the World Leaders do, and it's just got like more waves of it, more spread out, and it might be harder to get away from what's coming at you because there's just more of it. But it will still kill what touches. Like, whatever it touches, you pick it up.
It does feel that way. I think this list is very what's very interesting to me about this list in particular is that I, like, halfway through when you were reading it, I hadn't read the list yet, I was kind of like dozing off, like, oh, okay, this is a Goff's orc build, and then he's going to say 3B Snagaboys and kill rigs, and then you never got to that part. Instead, you said 3x7 knobs, and I said, how does he fit that with the kill rigs? Then I opened the list and I actually read, I'm like, oh, it's because he's doing triple battle wagon instead of triple kill rigs. And then I was like, boy, howdy, you sure do get a lot of stuff in there when you cut your kill rigs for battle wagons. That is a not inconsequential amount of orcs. And knobs getting a points decrease is super nice for them. So I really like this list from the orc perspective, because instead of having your transports deal a lot of damage if you get there, your transports are cheaper and will not do anything if they get there. But if they die in your deployment zone the way a kill rig would, because their durability is roughly similar, then you just have more stuff. That's it. And that's not a bad place to be at all. It's a really good place to be. And more on the comment of orcs in general, a surprisingly difficult thing that I found with orcs is that if you're making an orc plan, make sure it doesn't involve more CP than you start the game with. Because a lot of people have plans to do damage in combos, and they're like, oh yeah, my Khazrakins can, like, do like 79 mortal wounds in 3 directions if I spend these 3 command points. And they're like, okay, cool, how many CP do you have right now at bottom of 1? That's how many you got. Spend them right now or the game's over. And if you have to wait till turn 2 to power up your CP factory, too late. You're in combat.
Interesting. One thing that is coming to my mind from as we've gone through all of these is armies seem to either give a good punch or take a good punch, but very few split the difference or can do both. Is that fair? And is that something? And is that like a truth of this early stages of ARC that you need to be aware of? Do we think that that's going to continue? What are your thoughts on that?
Alex, you want to take this, or you want me to go?
Yeah, sure. Like, with 50% of the armies in the game, more than 50% of the field having a defensive reduction with AOC, more than that. I mean, if you include Chaos and Sisters as well, the game does feel a lot more killy. Unless you're specifically playing Marines, you didn't get any more stuff. Like, Sisters armies didn't get bigger, Chaos armies didn't get bigger, Marines did. It just feels like more stuff is being picked up off the board. So with being able to take a punch or deliver a punch, it does just feel like heightened. like even with Marines having more stuff on the board, it means that the combos get heavier.
Right.
Of like, I wasn't able to fit these 2 characters before, but now I can. And if I apply the stratagem to the East unit with the character behind it, then the damage just explodes.
Right.
So it is really weird about like, yeah, hammers and anvils and what the lists that we're seeing that are doing well, and the lists that aren't doing that are kind of maybe playing more like technical.
Mm-hmm.
I just think they have more chance of losing earlier. And that's why we're not seeing them. It's not that they're not good. Like Gene Stealer calls us having a good win rate, but we're not really seeing them on top tables. We're seeing guard players have, we'll call it hobby lag, because I think as good as that book is, if you don't have Solar or Ursula or Kazarkins in your list, like you're definitely playing with one arm behind your back. Some of those more technical lists might just hit the anvil and the tricks don't work. And then you're like, oh, okay. But like being the all gas or all defense list kind of gives you options. It not even gives you options, it just gives your opponent opportunities to fail.
Yeah, right.
Whereas your plan doesn't really fail. Like, I'm just tough. What are you going to do about it? I don't know. That's what it kind of feels like. That might be a little bit broad of a stroke, but it's what I feel in my heart.
It felt like a very aptly painted stroke. But you know what? I'm going to leave that metaphor there because everything I was going to do with it was just bad. John, what are your thoughts in response to Alex there?
General agreement. I think that we have the meta is inspiring people to go in one of 2 directions. And if you're caught in the middle, you're going to get run over from both ends. Like if you try to do a little bit of defense, a little bit of damage, you will not have enough damage to kill Dark Angel Terminators, and you will not survive Iron Hands. Congratulations on losing to both. And it's like, oh, okay. So I think that it's a bit of a problem, honestly. I think that the Arcs meta has had some unintended consequences. And maybe it's because Guard which wasn't necessarily a product of Arcs. It's just it happened to get introduced at around the same time because we didn't use it for November through January for some reason. So like, I think it's just that, and then the Space Marine winter that we are coming out of right now is it's just so much damage and so much free stuff, and all the non-Imperium armies are looking at that like just kind of like looking around like, what the hell just happened? Like imagine being the Necron player that's like, you know, like took a week or 2 on vacation, came back, and was just like looking around like, what?
Yeah, they're playing with 3,000 points to my 2. Okay, one more army that I want to talk about, and looking at it, tell me I'm crazy, but is this one actually sort of trying to split that difference? I guess it's more on the offense. This is from the Beachhead Brawl 2023 in England. Liam Calabout, Callebout, is how Liam spells Liam's name. This is Bellicor, Scarbrand, Changecaster Transweaver, 2 units of 10 Demonettes, which we spent the first 15 or so minutes of this hyping up, 2 units of 3 Nurglings, 2 units of 3 Fiends, a 6, a 5, and a 3 of Flamers, an Exalted Flamer, and 3 Screamers. Demons have managed to absolutely hold on, even in the face of Flamers now having to roll to hit. Talk to me about Demons.
You got anything, Alex?
There's a couple things that stand out here that are a little bit odd to me. Usually we see Wound-Gated Keeper over Scarbrand. Scarbrand is interesting.
Wound-Gated Bloodthirster, not Wound-Gated Keeper, right?
Oh, yeah. Bloodthirster. He just seems to be more reliable. He's faster because Scarbrand is, had his wings burned off.
Hilarious.
But I mean, other than that, it's kind of all the things that I would expect. Flamer's still very good. I like the split in sizes, the 6-5-3. So you have kind of like the appropriate amount of damage you need. You can commit exactly how much you want to put in. Obviously, you can deep strike them around the board with Bellicor. Couple of cute changes, like Screamers in the mix, probably just for tying up potential.
I would actually,
it's a cool list.
Yeah, it's a really cool list. I think Demons are, and I know I said don't split the middle. I think Demons are 1,000% the army that is uniquely positioned to try and split, because Demons don't have to go very far out of their way to end up with defense, because they're just conventionally annoying to kill with their demonic saves. That's really useful, it turns out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who
They're
would
also
thought
one of those.
ignoring your P?
They're also one of those armies where, depending on the board that you've got, can hide. Like that can be their defense. Is that like I know if you're playing WTC or UKTC, you can hide the big boys, even if you're 20 wounds with wings. They've got huge L's in some of those tables, so you can hide some of those massive models, and like the rest of the army isn't that big, or it might be deep striking in, so it doesn't have to be on the board. So you're kind of defensive outside of just raw stats, as just being able to say like, you don't get to see me turn 1, turn 2, we'll start playing the game.
Okay. One unit that's in here that we don't necessarily see a lot of, and if I remember Discord chatter correctly, John, you were at least mentioning them, were Fiends.
Yeah.
Do I recall correctly that you're looking for them? And B, I actually think they're pretty solid, but I would love for the smarter people to talk about them a little bit.
Okay, so I love Fiends. They're just a core Slaanesh unit that can take all the spells you would want, and they happen to be very fast, and they're beasts, I believe. So they move through walls without really giving a damn. And what's really good about Fiends, in my mind, and what makes them a thing that Demon players need, is that Fiends are one of the best things in the game at finding infiltrators and removing them in one activation.
Okay.
Because Demons have a bit of a Space Marine with guns problem in my mind. I think that's their hardest matchup, is either Space Marines or Guardsmen with a ton of guns pointed downfield and 12-inch no-go screens. And they need something to start on the table, not die immediately, cross the gap, and go blast whatever 12-inch no-go thing exists to remove it. And Fiends, just being a volume of strength 4 damage 2, means that you can't really transhuman them. They have good enough volume to power through saves. They've got enough AP to make an infiltrator not super thrilled. I think they're just great at specifically that role. And then they're also just very defensively efficient. For 30 points, it's essentially a 4-wound T4 model with a 4-up invuln against shooting. It's a demonic save for whatever difference that makes. And then you can cast a spell on them to give them a 5-up Feel No Pain.
Okay.
And so you end up having like you're paying less points per wound than an intercessor, which just got cheaper. And on top of that, you get a 4-up invuln, often a 5-up Feel No Pain if you're getting shot. And then you move like, I don't recall if they move 14 or 16 inches, but they move faster than your opponent.
It's 14, but 14 through walls is nuts.
Yeah, 14 through walls is good enough. That's good enough for me. So I just think Fiends are very uniquely positioned to be a skirmishing unit that can start on the board and hit people without having to rely on reserves. And that allows you to have other things in reserves that, if your opponent doesn't have infiltrators, then it's like, cool, 1,000 points my army in reserves, and 1,000 points on the table is Fiends, which are hard to shoot and will rush you down at the same time my reserves drop. So you really have to back up off of me. Oh, what's that? You backed up off of me, deep strike leadership away, and we're in.
Fair enough. And good analysis on the Fiends. That's very much solving a problem they have. And
I actually think Demons are one of the best answers to this Dark Angel Menace, because they also have very good passive secondaries. And then it turns into a little bit more of a fight over the middle, and Demons can actually do that.
Interesting. Okay, so those were all the lists I wanted to talk about, and largely want to wrap up so that Alex can go play Tim, and John can continue his evening however he was going to. But some broad thoughts. The takeaway that I'm going to bring from this is that the meta is broadly polar of, well, let's call it hammer and anvil, and you have to know which one of those you are and have a plan for how your hammer will deal with their anvil or vice versa. Is that a fair description of the starting point of arcs?
Unless you're a weirdo and you're playing GSC or something else, yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
Does the weirdo who might be playing GSC want to just take 2 or 3 minutes and tell us what to do with that?
I mean, the GSC lists I think are fairly largely figured out. It's a lot of neophytes, a lot of bikes, it's a lot of speed. It's the thing. It's gotten a lot better because of the lack of AOC. Like guards, like neophytes with their weapons can just scoop most marine bodies that they can see. But it definitely is still an army that just absolutely falls apart if you don't know exactly the moves to play. which is one of the reasons I don't think it's made any like big wins, although its win rate is quite good.
Yeah.
But you're not going to see it unless it's got a really dedicated pilot. I don't think you're going to see it in the top 8 of Cherokee, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just too many matchups where you're like, even if you are a quality player, you can just play it incorrectly with like 2 or 3 wrong moves and the whole system falls apart, and then now you're done. They also loathe guard. GSC hates guard. It's an abysmal matchup.
Yeah, I think now that every guard player has acknowledged that they want a Scout Sentinel and Perfectus orders, I think it's gotten real squirrely.
Yeah.
Okay.
To the point where I am including a Scout Sentinel specifically to give myself a path to their deployment zone if I need it.
On the GSC side of things.
On the GSC side, because I can take a Scout Sentinel for no downside.
Okay. And John, sorry, I cut you off earlier on the broad hammer anvil plans to deal with it. Thought?
Fully agreed for the top armies. You can try to be a scalpel if you're playing one of the off-meta armies that is good. I think elves fall into this category. I think that both Craft World and Harlequins are extremely competitive right now, but they each are a bit of a scalpel in this hammer versus anvil meta, and they run the risk of running into the wrong counter. And I think they're counter meta because they can beat some of the top lists, but not because they can beat all of them. I think Craft World Eldar can actually put a really good fight into most Space Marine armies, including, for the record, the Dark Angels, because Dire Vengers with Doom Guide, Fire and Fade, and Hail of Doom can still do a hilarious amount of damage to a Dark Angel army. But if they run into a Guard army, and then it can get really, really bad. Likewise, I think Harlequins can mess up a lot of things and actually have fair play into Guard. But if you run into the wrong thing like Orcs, I personally think Harlequins don't love the Orc matchup. But I'll admit I don't play other armies, so I could just end up being wrong with that. But I think Harlequins have a couple of weird matchups. I know Chaos Knights is very difficult for them. That one I will say with actual belief. If you randomly run into Chaos Knights while playing your Harlequins, you are deep sixed immediately.
Okay. Well,
counter meta is hard.
Yeah. No. Well, I just want to thank you guys both so much for coming here. Let's wrap it up and let everyone continue their evening. I think this was a really interesting conversation. I certainly learned something, and I'm going to have a new perspective on how to go forward. For the people who are watching and the people who are listening, we plan on doing something similar to this every month, where we just sort of go through what has been doing well, what can we learn from it, where are we going forward. It will probably be with a rotating guest of experts, and Colin will be joining more regularly, which will increase the expertise on the host side of things. But with that, do you guys want to take this opportunity to plug your stuff again? Just because I think that's a useful thing for you guys.
It's Art of War. They know what's going on. John, you want to get any more in depth on that?
100%. If you enjoy this content, thank you. These guys are awesome. Make sure you support them if you're not already throwing money at their Patreon. I don't know if this is Patreon exclusive. I think it's going to Patreon. It's going to be
public for, that's actually, let me really quickly explain that. This is going to be public for a week, and then it goes to only the members. It's one of the things we're trying to do to incentivize people to become members. And thank you, John. I appreciate that. But you came and gave your time. Please take some free in-kind donation and pump up Art of War for the one person who's here who doesn't know about you.
Well, make sure that you just go to our YouTube channel and give it a like. We put out a lot of free content on YouTube, but of course, our main feature is the Art of War War Room. That's where a lot of top players and coaches like myself, Mr. McDougs, Richard Siegler, Nick Donavati, Jack Harpster, everyone who has won the ITC recently, and also me, are there to teach you about how to get better at Warhammer 40K in an awesome global community. So make sure you check it out. Our website's theartofwar40k.com. We have an app now. We have if you perhaps have been in Art of War in the past, but not recently, I would say that this is a very good time to rejoin, because we have spent a lot of dollary dues updating the format, updating the website, and making it more user-friendly, making an app, and also changing the content a little bit to be more in line with what the community wants. So make sure you check it out. Check out our YouTube channel as well if you want to get a taste of it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, and again, thank you guys. This will be public for a while to get people's beaks wet, and hopefully it is the sort of thing that folks will, want to come back for more of. Again, thank the two of you so much, and see all of you listeners some other time. Have a wonderful whatever you're doing.
Bye-bye.